This is Lightning Power Lunch on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli.
We're back. Yes, we are. Another week here of Lightning, mostly Lightning talk, I think, today. I was talking to my neighbor. Dave Mishkin's with me, of course, Steve Bursnick producing, and Lucas, who had a question that we're going to get to today. He goes, yeah, I'm gonna get you today. He's like, the national stuff, I can't get into it, especially with the Panthers winning. But I'm gonna get into some questions for you guys on the show. And
we promise very little Panther talk this week.
This is it.
The curtain has closed on the 24-25 season.
It is done.
We have plenty. We were going over before we hopped on the air all of the items that we can cover this week.
Well, there's a trade.
Maybe we needed to do 2 shows this week.
Yeah.
Fans
Trades.
are clamoring for more Power Lunch.
Isaac Howard, of course. Jeff Tambellini. And then we've got
free agent signings.
So
we had the development camp, which I was able to attend. It was the first time that I've been in town, because I've not always been in town when this camp has happened. But it's the first time that I've been in town that I was given the 2 days off for the 3-on-3, which I actually didn't mind. I mean, it's just a different exercise, kind of learning the players and calling the 3-on-3. I was right next to Dave Randorf and Brian Engblom, who did call the 3-on-3 for the 2 days, but I had a different perspective, just kind of watching to watch and not watching to call the game. So we can get into a little bit of that too.
And Tyler Johnson.
Congratulations
he's retiring.
To Johnny, who officially retired. Injuries slowed him a bit in the second half of his career, and I mean that literally and figuratively, because I think one reason why Tyler Johnson was able to be one of the best players in the NHL, which he was, I would say, in the first half of his NHL career, was that he had that quickness. And whether it was injuries or just what, wear and tear, who knows, he lost just a smidge, and it doesn't take much when you are not a big guy. Like, he was built a little bit like Marty St. Louis in that, he had really like tree trunk legs, but I mean, what was he, 5'9"? So if you lose that elusiveness, it can really affect your game. He was still a productive player, an effective player for the Lightning, but he wasn't quite the same dominant player. The line with Johnson, Palat, and Kucherov in the 14-15 season may have been the best line in the NHL that year. And had Tyler Johnson not gotten injured in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, Lightning might have won that final. Blackhawk fans might disagree, but there's no question the injury affected him, and he was having a Conn Smythe-worthy playoff that year.
That's saying something.
So the injury to Johnson was a significant blow to the Lightning and their Cup hopes in that series.
Yeah, for sure. So, productive player and a really good player for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And, the Lightning weren't active a ton. I didn't think they would have been during free agency partner, but they did make a couple of signings that we can get into that, have a chance
a couple
to see
of
these guys in
signings.
action.
They had more than a couple, but most of the others were kind of like the players are on 2-way contracts slated for the minors.
Correct.
The 2 guys that you mentioned, you didn't mention them, you mentioned 2. They are Pontus Holmberg, who played last year with the Maple Leafs, and Jacob Peltier, who was with the Calgary Flames organization and came over to the Flyers in the trade that sent, among others, Morgan Frost to Calgary. He has been a tweener guy. So they signed both of these guys, and I had the opportunity, Greg, attending one of the 3-on-3 practice sessions Julian Breezebaugh had. I don't know if it was impromptu or it was announced and I didn't know about it, but I was there, so they let me come in. And he had kind of just an informal sit down with the writers going over. This was right after they had obviously signed these players. So people were like, well, why did they sign these 2 players? And how are these players available? So they were not expected to be available by Lightning management heading like in the weeks leading up to July 1. The reason that both players became available because they were both restricted free agents. We had a lot of talk about, Gage Gonsalves as a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. The Lightning worked out a deal with Gage Gonsalves. If you are a restricted free agent, though, with arbitration rights, that means that, the team that holds your rights can qualify you. And then you are kind of sort of locked in with that team. If you cannot reach an agreement with the team and player cannot reach an agreement, the player can file for arbitration. The team can also file for arbitration, but let's take it from the player side. If the player files for arbitration, that means assuming they cannot work out an agreement before this point comes that they go to an arbitrator. The arbitrator is like a judge. He listens to like arguments from both the player side and the team side and decides to designate a contract, term and years. I was always under the impression that the team, if they didn't like the deal, could just walk away and the player becomes a UFA. I actually asked that of Julian in this press conference. I was wrong about that, kind of sort of wrong. If it is above a certain dollar amount, the team can walk away. But if it's at or below that dollar amount, the team must accept the contract. So sometimes there is a fear on the part of the team that if this player, the RFA with arbitration rights, if that player decides to file for arbitration and the arbitrator awards a salary that is not so high that they can walk away, but high enough that it's going to maybe affect some of the other things they want to do, the team will just walk away. They will not qualify the player. But nobody really knows that around the league until it happens. So in the case of Holmberg, and I got to be honest, I'm frankly surprised. I mean, it's not like we're talking about this threshold is like $7 million. Like if Pontus Holmberg some way, somehow got awarded an arbitration number at like $5.5 million, and the Leafs are like, we can't afford to pay this guy who's basically a bottom six for us, a good player. We can't afford to pay him 5.5. Okay, I get that. The number is much lower than that. But the Leafs decided that whatever else they want to do, even understanding that they probably knew Mitch Marner was not coming back and they were going to get basically relief from the Marner contract, they were not comfortable allocating what they thought Holmberg might get from an arbitrator, incorporating that. So they said, we're not qualifying him. You are a UFA. Now, sometimes the team can say, we're just going to try and negotiate with you at the number that we can afford, but why would the player do that, right? The player is like, maybe I can get more elsewhere. I don't know. It's not like the Lightning paid Pontus Holmberg that much. I think he got a 1.55 AAV. I mean, it's not the league minimum, but it's not a huge amount. So this guy, like,
68
I wouldn't
games.
say he dropped into the Lightning's lap, but it was unexpected that he was going to be a UFA. And the Lightning really like this guy. When we had the session with Julian, he was basically going over Holmberg and Peltier, and he's like, Holmberg is an NHLer. Right. Holmberg will be on the Tampa Bay Lightning next year. Holmberg will fit a role. He will play probably in the bottom six. He's a center. He's a lefty. He will be a penalty killer. I actually asked Julian as well about the Glendening situation with the missing, basically a faceoff specialist on the right side, a righty. Because it stands right now, Greg, the Lightning only have one right-handed centerman, Braden Point, who doesn't usually play penalty kill. And Julian actually mentioned, I don't know if it's going to play out this way, but Holmberg is capable of taking faceoffs and winning them on his weak side. I don't know if he does it like Crosby and, wins them on his forehand, but he's like, that's an option. He also mentioned, interestingly, because some of the fans have talked about this, Jack Finley, who is a right-handed centerman who's a prospect. Very little NHL experience, though, just one game. So the Holmberg ad, I think, was not necessarily in the forecast, but the Lightning were very happy to get him. So some of the fans were like, the Lightning need to get grittier and tougher and bigger and more physical. Holmberg is not really that guy, but having seen him play over the last couple of years and really noticing him when the Lightning played the Leafs last year and the Lightning struggled with the Leafs, he is a pain in the rear end to play against. He is a dog on the bone kind of player that I think you really like to have in the bottom six. And sure. Hedman knew him. They'd played together at a world championship, for Team Sweden. So, look, we're going to see how it works out. But that is one guy the Lightning added to the NHL roster at a very, I would say, team-friendly number. Peltier is a former first-round pick, played in the Quebec League. I think a lot of the French-born, French-Canadian-born, members of management or whatever, you got Joel Bouchard, who coached in that league. Julian, knows a lot about that. Like, this guy was a very, very highly regarded, well-regarded junior player. He got drafted in the first round by Calgary. His development has not progressed probably the way you would have expected for a guy who was drafted in the first round. He's been a tweener. He's had a lot of injury problems, though. And honestly, this is a low-risk ad for the Lightning because the dollar amount is not particularly high, but they feel that he has the upside potential to maybe realize some of the potential that the Flames saw when they drafted him in the first round. Is he going to be on the NHL roster this year? I have no idea, but he's in the mix. And he's a guy who has, I would say, a pedigree that was good enough for him to go in the first round. He's still a young guy. So those are the two main guys, and I know I did a lot of talking about both of them, but Julian was kind of filling us in on kind of their thought process. And the same thing happened with Peltier that happened with Holmberg. The Flyers decided not to qualify him because they thought his arbitration award would be more than they were willing to incorporate, essentially. And so that's how those two guys became available.
See, and where I look at this is an opportunity for the Lightning potentially to get younger, if that's the right word, in their bottom six with some upside. To your point, low risk. These are things you have to do sometimes when you're a team who's spending up to the cap. Maybe you have to continue to find ways to bring in players who have some more left in them but haven't been able to reach that potentially there. And knowing that your minor league system is getting back to where you want it to be, but if you can find, I don't want to call it bargains, but maybe you call them that, where you can bring somebody in and you can work with some of the tools that they have in that toolbox, it makes some sense. And I think the key there was these are two players that are going to be playing at the NHL level.
Well, at least one of them.
Well, at least one
this year.
At least one of them. And wouldn't be surprised if both, are playing at some point, if injuries or performance, whatever that may be. But I think an opportunity to get it a little younger in the bottom six.
Yeah, that they did, for sure. When
I think that helps.
Not bringing back Glendening and Atkinson, who are both, mid-30s, mid to late 30s,
Correct.
if you want to say that, 36 next year, and you're getting guys, Peltier, I think, is 24.
Yeah.
Holmberg might be 26. I'm doing that off the top of my head, but they're definitely in their mid-20s.
So you got younger, and there's some upside there. To your point with Glendening and Atkinson, I think what you saw is what you were going to get. And, you also had to deal with guys who were either injured or coming off injuries. And when you're an older player, sometimes that takes a toll. So a couple of young guys. Holmberg is interesting because a lot of experience, relatively speaking, 68 games, as you pointed out, last year with Toronto. Played in a pretty high-stake environment. We know what it's like to play in that environment. So I think for him specifically, a guy that should look at this as an opportunity to rejuvenate, per se, his career with a team who's had a lot of history winning and winning at a pretty high level, and having an opportunity here really to make an impact in the bottom six. So
he picked the Lightning.
He did.
He could have gone anywhere. Once the Leafs did not qualify him, he became an unrestricted free agent. He decided to join the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was talks with his countryman, Victor Hedman, to maybe come over and
it's not like Hedman's the only Swede floating around the NHL, though.
That's true. So I don't know why he chose the Lightning, other than I think the Lightning's reputation is pretty good around the league, and it's an opportunity for somebody to come down here and make an impact. And I think you want to find a place where you can play and win. And so I don't know what his upside is offensively, partner. And we may never know.
So he only had 19 points last year. I mean, that's not a huge amount for, essentially playing on the third line. I want to say he was on the third line with the Leafs most of last year. But he himself said, I feel I have more offense to give.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
He's young enough. And, look, he's going to be surrounded by some players who can do some things. And we always talk about John Cooper and his ability to interchange players and move things around. And, guys who start out on a third line may find themselves playing on a first line for some games. So he may find himself an opportunity to have those numbers increase. I think for him, the one thing you're going to say is, look, use your speed, forecheck, be hard to play against, be sound defensively. And if you can skate in this organization, you're going to find yourself in the lineup more times than not. So we'll see if that pans out. But I like those moves. But I think you and I talked about this. I didn't think we thought the Lightning were going to be huge players.
No. You floated the idea of a trade. And, I guess Julian's always got his eyes and ears, open and attuned to any potential trade. But he kind of forewarned, if that's the right word, Lightning Nation that it was going to be probably a pretty quiet free agency period, and it was.
Well, he was pretty vocal at the end of the year. He liked his team.
Yeah, and he said that again. He's like, I feel like when we had this little sit down, he said, I feel like every time I've met with the media since the season ended, I'm repeating myself. But he said, I like our team. So I do want to mention the development camp.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, the early part, first of all, they lost a day because they had some kind of issue with power outage at the TGH Iceplex in Brandon, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But usually the first couple of days are kind of geared toward skating and skill work. So it's not really, there's not a lot of up and down the ice, right? It's really about watching these players skate and filming their technique. And Barb Underhill is one, but she's, I think, the main person, and there are people underneath her who are giving the players feedback. It's almost like, you go to a golf camp, and I don't know if you've ever done this. I did it once when I was younger, but they film your swing. They're like, all right, this is what you're doing right in your swing, and here are some things that maybe are not going so well in your swing to become more efficient or hit the ball farther or hit the ball more straight, whatever. It's the same concept, right? So they're taking a look at your skating stride, and they're doing comprehensive testing. And they're giving each individual player feedback about okay, here's what you can work on. Here's the technique that will help you be a better skater. Look at Braden Point. Look at Anthony Cirelli, how they benefited from this. And then it's kind of up to the player to go and do the work, right? It's almost like, how much time do you spend in class? The learning has to take place really outside the classroom, with reps, whether it's homework or thinking about it. Maybe a bad example.
Sure.
And then the skill work is kind of the same thing, and they're working on puck handling, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end, they have this 3-on-3 tournament. So they break it into, I think they had 5 teams this year. They play a round robin. The 2 teams with the best record meet then in the final, and they get to draft basically players from the 3 other teams. So every player plays in the final game, which is they did 16-minute halves, running clock, full ice. The earlier rounds, but it was 3-3. The earlier rounds are half ice. So it's almost like you reset coming out of the offensive zone or defensive zone to change possession. So usually these things are kind of fun to watch. You can learn some things, like actually 3-on-3, you might think, all this space. When you go to half ice, it's actually tight. So you can kind of see how players navigate tight spaces. How are they coming out of the corner? JP Cote actually said, we want players to actually go from the outside to the inside in this 3-on-3, and we're watching for that. You could see players trying to get to the inside, which is an important skill in a regular game, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be able to get to a better spot on the ice to score.
Sure.
But it is 3-on-3, the stakes are only so high. There's really no hitting, although there was a little bit of hitting. So what can you take out of it? I'm not one of these scouts. I'm not in management. So what I say, take with a grain of salt. But there were a couple of guys I noticed. Milo Rollins, who was with the Lightning last year in training camp. He's a bigger guy. He played in the Quebec League. I want to say he was undrafted or he was drafted and didn't come to an agreement. Anyway, the Lightning got him as a free agent at the end of his final junior year. And last year, he kind of split time between Syracuse and Orlando. So it's not like he took, Syracuse by storm and became a Dylan Duke, let's say. He was very impressive in this tournament. Scored a lot. He's a big guy, but he can skate. I was impressed with his puck handling skills. But he was a guy that we saw last year, but I thought he was more impressive this year than even last year. Another guy, and often this summer tournament, for the players who are in college and returning to college, this is the only time that we get to see them. Because when training camp starts, they are in school. So one guy who the Lightning drafted, Jason Shogabay, plays in Minnesota Duluth. He was on the team actually that won the whole thing. Like, he's a pretty crafty player. And again, I'm only seeing him for a few hours every year. I just remember noticing him more this year than last year. So let's monitor that. They actually invited a guy, Callum Arnott, who also played at Minnesota Duluth. I don't know if they were, kind of keeping track of Shogabay, and they're like, oh, this guy's pretty good too. Let's invite him to the camp. Anyway, he scored a couple of goals as well, this Arnott. But Shogabay, I thought, had an impressive tournament. And then one of the guys the Lightning drafted just this summer, Rotiainen is his name, Benjamin Rotiainen. He's the guy the Lightning took when they traded with Boston, I think it was, to acquire a 4th-round pick. They took Rotiainen. Rotiainen is a guy who's played at the men's league level in Europe, and he had extreme poise. He was also on the winning team. He was very impressive. So those are just a few guys. Again, Rotiainen, I think, might be eligible to turn pro this year, even though he was just drafted. Many of the other, Rollins is obviously a pro player. Most of the guys in this camp, if they're coming to the September camp, they're probably not sticking with the Lightning. They may be going back to their amateur team. So I'm going to mention one other guy, because Brian Engblom and I were both like jaw dropped when we saw this. So Brian and Dave Randorf had to sit down with John Rosso, who joined us last week on the show. Mm-hmm. But they had like an informal talk before the 3-on-3, and Rosso was going through every guy on the list. And the one guy that Rosso mentioned to Brian, that Brian then mentioned to me as the 3-on-3 round robin was happening, which again was half ice. He's like, the Lightning took this guy, Everett Baldwin. He's a defenseman. They took him in the 5th round. He played at a prep school last year in Rhode Island, and I think he's going to play junior hockey for a year at 18. Then at 19, he is slated to go to Providence College. So he's on the college hockey track. It's another big news item that is going to affect amateur hockey with this. Now junior players can go play college. You saw this. Gavin McKenna is going to play at Penn State.
Penn State, how about that?
And he got NIL money. So, I mean, that's a topic for another day. But anyway, Everett Baldwin is slated. He's a U.S.-born kid. He's going to play junior hockey for a year right now. It looks like he's going to go to Providence. So John Rosso was raving about this guy and, like, how great of a skater he is. So as we get into the round robin, Brian, like, as they're off the air, he's like, John Rosso mentioned this Everett Baldwin. And he's like, I haven't really noticed him. And I'm like, yeah, I can't say that I've noticed him either. They went to the full ice. It was like, you might know very little to nothing about hockey, and you could watch that, and you're like, who's that guy? Brian referenced the name Cale Makar on the broadcast.
Come on.
I'm telling you, Greg. I am telling you.
Cale Makar.
This guy, well, again, it's a 3-on-3.
3-on-3.
He's not playing against NHLers.
Ryan McDonough.
But you could see his skating at 18 elite. Is high elite. It's high elite. So not only his skating, but his stick handling, and you couldn't see it in the half ice. But once it, and I'm not saying there was all of this ice. He found ice, but he was like, whoop, He was gone. And it took one half, the 16 minutes, and we had the break. And I looked at Brian, and Brian looked at me, and we were like, did you see this Baldwin?
Yeah.
Like, we were so impressed. So, again, we're years away, Lightning fans, from probably seeing
You think he's going to play this year, Dave?
Yeah. He's 18. He's got a lot of developing to go.
Right.
But there is a reason why John Rosso mentioned him to Dave and Brian. And, again, half ice, 3-on-3, for a guy who can really skate in space, you can only see so much. But once you gave him room to use his ability, he was very, very noticeable.
So when somebody says he can skate, for you, what's noticeable? Because, is he
it's the
fast?
acceleration. So it's not just being fast. It's being quick.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to find that higher gear almost right off the bat. And he was doing it with a puck, too. Because I wasn't really watching him when he didn't have the puck, right? He has the puck, and he's able to slice around guys, too, which is a Makar feature, right?
Sure.
Like, what do we notice about Cale Makar when Cale Makar has the puck and he's skating? Like, he's fast and he's elusive. And that's what we noticed about Baldwin.
And where is he playing? Coming up here, you said?
So he is slated to play college hockey at Providence. College, but I don't think, because they can hold these guys back. I hold them back. I mean, they can join the college team maybe at 19. So he's 18. I think he's going to go play in the Quebec League for a year. But who knows with this? I mean, maybe it's set and you commit, right? So he's committed to Providence College. I have no further insight other than just what we were told. I'm just telling you, like, I noticed this guy.
He stood out.
But I didn't notice him until they did the full ice.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, maybe a diamond in the rough. For the
yeah, and you're like, all right, if that's the case, why did he go to the fifth round? Who knows? Yeah. I'm just telling you, this was my reaction watching this guy.
Pretty impressive.
Very impressive, yeah.
Very cool. We spent, I would say, a decent amount towards the end of this past season on our show talking about Isaac Howard and where he was going to go.
Yes. Another news item.
Another news item. And, I was on X last night, and I saw that, the Lightning had made the trade, and I was like, oh, wow. Where'd he go? And he goes to Edmonton for another first-round pick, former first-round pick. And we can get into, I confess I've never heard of the guy. Doesn't mean he's not good. But I think a lot of people were disappointed maybe how that whole thing ended up with Howard, because I think there were a lot of high hopes that he would be a member of the Lightning organization and somebody pretty impactful. And I think Julian probably felt that way too. They just they couldn't come to an agreement on what it sounds like to me is Howard wanted a definitive role, maybe with the big club, and maybe specifically somewhere in a top 6 or a top 9, probably more in a top 6, where he was going to play and play pretty regularly. The Lightning just, and this is me spitballing, probably weren't willing to give him that type of commitment, and because of that, he forced their hand. And you can say the Lightning got something for him, and they chose Edmonton and got a prospect. And we'll see, eventually how that plays out. But it does come to an end, and I think a little disappointing that we weren't able to see Howard in a Lightning uniform based off the credentials in college, especially that last year partner.
Yeah, so again, it's unclear to me how much of the dispute with Howard was specific to last year, the end of last year, like Howard wanted to go straight to the Lightning, and the Lightning were up against it cap-wise. So, I mean, that was going to be difficult. And how much of this was maybe looking forward to this year, this upcoming year, and Howard wanted assurances that he was going to be in the NHL, and the Lightning were unable to give him that guarantee. Who knows? The ship has sailed, and it was clear that it had sailed basically by the time last season had ended. So had the Lightning not been able to move Howard, they would have gotten a 2027 second-round pick. I'm not sure where that second-round pick would have been. Like, were we talking about 33rd overall or like 65th overall, right? Or, the end of the second round. But Julian knew that at worst, they were looking at a second-round pick. So if they were going to move Howard, you figured they were going to be getting something more than a second-round pick. They got more than a second-round pick. So actually, if you look at the two players, Isaac Howard and Sam O'Reilly, who were 2 years apart, so the Lightning got a player 2 years younger. They were drafted 2 years apart. Howard was taken basically near the end of the first round in 2022, and O'Reilly went with the last pick in the 2024 draft in the first round that Edmonton had. And although Florida would have had the last pick, so I'm not quite sure. It was 32nd, so I'm not quite sure why that was. But end of first round for both players. So the Lightning got a guy, first of all, they know who the player is, as opposed to getting a draft pick where you don't know who the player is going to be. Second of all, they got a player who has already been drafted and has some like track record. So it's not a player that they acquired who was just drafted. He was drafted a year ago, and he has had a sterling junior career. So he's played for a very, very good team in the OHL, the London Knights. The London Knights have won the OHL championship the last 2 years, which have been the 2 years that are pertinent for O'Reilly. Not this year. Last year, in other words, playoffs 2024, London won the OHL championship, went to the Memorial Cup, went to the final, and lost in the final game to Saginaw, which won the Memorial Cup. O'Reilly was a big-time contributor for London. This year, again, O'Reilly was a big-time contributor for London. Again, London won the OHL championship, and this time London won the Memorial Cup. Actually, against Medicine Hat, whose goalie, Harrison Menigan, is a Lightning draft pick and prospect who played in this prospect camp. So Medicine Hat played London in the Memorial Cup final. London won, and O'Reilly is termed as a very, very good two-way forward. So he has good offensive numbers. They aren't the numbers that you would see from a guy who would be going like top 5 in the first round. But it is clear based on kind of what I'm reading about him is that he knows the game really, really well. So his hockey IQ is high. His compete is very, very high. And he's a proven winner, at least at the junior level. So those three things I just mentioned check a lot of boxes. Those are 3 important boxes for the Lightning to check. So they're getting a guy who kind of knows the game and is projected to be an NHLer. So when you're kind of looking at, we have this guy who's not going to play for us, we need to get something for him. I think without knowing really anything about Sam O'Reilly other than what I just told you and read, like that sounds like the Lightning did a pretty good job. And Julian did not have a gun to his head at this point where he's like, we need to make this move yesterday. So this was clearly a guy the Lightning wanted. And after that, we just have to kind of put our faith in, the people that are scouting that, he's a guy that would fit. But for a guy like this, who has played in some prominent tournaments, right? Like every scout that's an amateur scout is watching the Memorial Cup, right? The OHL scouts are all watching London play the last couple of years in these high pressure, high stakes games, playoff games. And this was the takeaway that the Lightning had from watching this guy in Edmonton too. There's a reason why Edmonton took him in the first round in 2024.
Yeah, and I think for Edmonton, do they see more upside with Howard from an offensive perspective? Maybe. Based off of the scouting report you just gave. I don't know. That's a team that's up against the cap. There's a lot of talk that they can't keep certain players, not only this year, but in the following years because of contracts they had to give out. I do think they have, some players who, I don't want to say have hit their ceiling, but maybe an infusion of youth who can produce from a points perspective is something they needed to complement McDavid and Draisaitl and some others.
Or they just liked him, Greg. I mean,
they just liked him more.
Be there
yeah,
like, we love this guy. Howard, I'm talking about. He's a big game player. He's done well at the biggest moments. He helped Michigan State. Remember, he scored that double overtime goal to help them win their league championship. He excelled at the World Juniors. Like, he has some cachet. And Edmonton was like, we just want this guy.
Yeah.
But we know we have to give up something to get him. So it wasn't going to work out for the Lightning to get this guy in the fold. So they pivoted, right? And for the people who were wondering, well, we're going to see Sam O'Reilly this year. He's 19, so he doesn't have another year of eligibility. But he is signed for these junior players, and this is changing. This is one of the other changes I think that's going to come with the CBA that did get extended. So starting in 26, 27, they have to figure out a different way of, like, figuring out how to, like, how long does a team hold a player's rights, because we have this new transference between junior hockey and college hockey. Again, a topic for another day, and we need to get some people who understand this subject way better than me. But for O'Reilly, he is signed, but that contract does not kick in until he actually turns pro. So this upcoming year, if Sam O'Reilly is going to be turning pro, it is going to be with the Lightning. It will not be with Syracuse. He's either going to be with the Lightning or he's going to go back to junior hockey for another year. Well, it looks like Howard, because he signed his contract as a college player, he's turning pro, which is what he wanted to do last spring.
I want to get to some questions here, too, and save the last 15
and we also,
minutes.
the Tambellini news.
I wanted to get to
he's
that
a guy,
as well.
Yeah, he's played in the Lightning's organization. He was a part of the pro scouting department when the Lightning were in their cup runs around COVID. Then he went to Seattle and was basically, he was like their JP Cote. He was kind of the player development guy. And, a lot of the Lightning people know him well, including Joel Bouchard, who's actually a teammate of his, I read. But Tambellini and Brisebois know each other. So congratulations to Jeff Tambellini.
So I think that covers, right, partner? The news and
I think
and
we
notes.
5 items, right? We got
we
five?
got to.
Yeah.
If people want to weigh in, they can at Bolts Radio. Tampa Bay on X says, I'd like to see Geeky and Finley on a line together. They could mesh well with their frame.
Well, that is going to be a decision left to John Cooper, but that is if Jack Finley is actually on the NHL roster. And what Julian said, because I asked this face-off question, and that's when he mentioned Finley. I don't think if Finley makes the Lightning and is with the Lightning, they're going to be giving him all of this responsibility that Glendening had. I mean, even Glendening, who's been one of the best face-off guys in the NHL for a decade plus, his first year in the NHL, I think maybe his first year pro, he was just like, I was just okay on face-offs. I had to get a lot better. It's a lot to bite off. So I'm not sure if they're going to just slot Finley, if he makes the Lightning, into the role that Glendening was in, relating to big face-offs. But that's step one for him. But the Lightning, as an organization, are very high on Finley. For Julian to say, we feel like basically Finley is going to be in the mix, to be one of these right-handed centermen taking face-offs, is a great compliment to Finley. He's had a lot of injury problems since he's turned pro. But hopefully, that's behind him and he can continue to take a step forward and build on last year when he got into the one game with the Lightning.
I don't want to say Finley is the new Crozier so far in the offseason for me, but I have a lot of people, relatively speaking, that keep mentioning Finley as somebody that they think can, I don't want to say start the year with Tampa Bay, but maybe that next prospect who's knocking on the door that could do something.
And Tampa Bay is right. He is a big man.
Yeah.
And he can handle himself. He had a fight with, I think it may have been in that playoff series against Rochester, and he basically, popped the guy and knocked him down. So I don't know if that's really part of his regular, MO. Is he a Tanner Jeannot type player? I don't really think that that's necessarily.
There's only one Tanner Jeannot, Dave.
Well, right. Meaning a guy who, would be feared around the NHL as a fighter. But Finley has that in his repertoire, clearly.
This question comes from Nick. He said, guys, realistically, how many open spots at the forward position are there for the Lightning?
That's a good question. I don't have the depth chart in front of me. But, I mean, look, they've added Holmberg. I think he's going to have a spot for sure. So if you're taking out Glendening and Atkinson from last year's roster, and Atkinson was more out than in, and we're putting Geeky in with Gonsalves. You got Bjorkstrand, you got Gord. I mean, I think you're looking at not many necessarily open spots at forward. So as we talk about a guy like Jack Finley, he's almost going to have to wedge his way in there, you know? You got Gergensons, you got Chafee, right?
I don't think they're going away.
No, I mean, they're under contract. So
it's also going to be interesting to see guys like Duke and how they take their next step and pushing for playing time, but you want that internal competition, especially in the bottom six. I do believe in that is where your team can make a big jump, assuming that you have your top six relatively intact. If you want to move the needle a lot, you do need your depth players to perform, but you also have to have good competition, I think, year in and year out. And I think the Lightning's best years is when they've had that. And we'll see if this year is any different.
I will say this, Greg, just based on having watched this guy play against the Lightning, I think the Lightning upgraded their forward unit with Holmberg. I think their forward unit,
I tend to agree with you,
is at a higher level just adding him. Now, we're going to have to see more progression from Gonsalves, who had a great finish to last year. We're going to have to see progression from Geeky. Can he do it for a whole year? Whereas he had a great start to last year and then, obviously had to spend some time in the minors. But independent of all of that, I really like the addition of Holmberg.
Yeah. Lucas, my neighbor, says, I'm glad we stayed away from the big money free agents and 8-year contracts to 30-year-old players. Really like adding around the fringes and seeing who competes the hardest in camp and preseason. Depth wins championships. I would agree with that. I think.
Well, you need a lot to win a championship. You
do.
Need depth. You need superstars usually. You need luck. You need bounces. But, if we, and I will mention the Panthers just this once because they've been the champions the last 2 years. They have all of that, right?
Depth allows you to get by when your star players aren't clicking.
Yeah.
Because if you have some guys, we saw it again in the championship runs, if you have your third line who's able to take over a game offensively and even just lock things down defensively. There's different ways your depth players can impact the game. It can be penalty kill. It could be just being responsible, being hard to play against. All of those phrases are true. I think when I talk about, the depth scoring, that's what I focus on the offense, because I do think in today's NHL, when the margins are so tight and narrow, your third liners have to be able to produce a little bit, and your fourth liners now to a degree. Everybody can skate for the most part. Everybody, we talked about this, has a skills coach, or did. And so I think there is a level of expectation with your third and fourth lines that they're just not players who just go out there and skate up and down. Like Marty St. Louis once said, I think you need some guys. Killers. Yeah, I think you need some guys who can do more of the things you're used to seeing now.
I think in a championship run, and it may not be every team has this, but I think we see it a lot. When we talk about that third line, it's not just a line that can drive play, which is really important, and make the other team play defense, right? They are actually providing the difference in a game offensively. And I'm just going to give you one example. This one's the top of my head. 2021 Stanley Cup Final, Lightning Canadiens. It's game 2 at Amalie, and frankly, like, this was the pushback game for the Canadiens. In some ways, this was Montreal's best game in the series, even better than the game that they won. And the Lightning were kind of swimming upstream, but it was 1-1, closing moments of the second period. And remember, Goodrow and Coleman teamed up for that spectacular goal where Coleman's sliding to the ice and taps it in. The Lightning got the lead at 2-1, and they ended up winning that game, I think, 3-1 to take a 2-0 lead in the series. Like, that was a difference-making goal. It wasn't only that, Goodrow, Gord, and Coleman were a pain in the rear end to play against, which they were, and they forced the other team to play defense. Like, they contributed as a line huge, huge goals. And I'll say one other thing about the Panthers, at least this last year. Like, how many games did the Panthers win in their run this last year where arguably their best line, the most productive line, was the Lundell, Osterine, and Marchand line? So, I mean, they got contributions from the guys in the top six, but it was that third line. I mean, it happened against the Lightning, certainly in Game 5. Mm-hmm. They were the difference-making line in Game 5, and it happened throughout the playoffs. So when you talk about scoring depth, I mean, that's a big part of it. It's not only the ability to score, it's actually scoring. It's actually giving your team an offensive boost when the margins are tight. And I know we've talked through the years about the HBK line with Pittsburgh and how important that line was, to their championship runs. It wasn't only that, they had good players who could play and play well. They scored big goals.
This is a good one. Matt on YouTube says, Edmonton didn't want to give up O'Reilly because his game translates to the NHL extremely well. Edmonton felt they needed control over skilled and cheap wingers over the next 5 to 6 years. With McDavid and Draisaitl, the third-line center slot becomes less important. Consider O'Reilly as a Cirelli with less of a chance to reach his offensive totals. This is from an Edmonton fan who watches prospects as a hobby.
Well, that's way more knowledgeable than what I can give you if this person has watched O'Reilly.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Matt, I have no idea if you're right or not, but that sounded good. So we're going to go with that.
I will point out
we're going to go with that.
Howard is going to be an RFA because the college players that are a little older usually, I mean, it's a 2-year. Did they sign him to a 2-year? I think you have to sign a college player to a 2-year deal. Someone's going to correct me if I got that wrong. But so I understand what he's saying about locking in, a winger who will be a little bit friendlier in terms of the cost. Who knows? I mean, it's clear that Howard has a lot of self-confidence about, like, I'm going to write my ticket, or I'm going to at least lean into whatever juice is given me, whatever leeway I have gotten from the CBA, I'm going to lean into that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to kind of push back on what an organization maybe is saying to me and say, well, this is a relationship. I'm not just going to accept what you say. So we'll see. Some players, as we say, like, demand a lot. That's why they hold out.
Sure.
Not talking about Howard in this instance, but, players who were earlier in their careers, are looking for a big payday in the second contract or the third contract, and the teams are like, well, hold your horses. So
it's always interesting when you hear, and in this case, let's assume that Matt is correct, why a team potentially would give up a player or not. And I think with younger players, there's a lot of uncertainty, but that scouting report, if you told me that for a first-round pick, particularly later in the first round, was gonna turn out to be, let's call it Anthony Cirelli light.
Mm-hmm.
The way people swing and miss with first-round picks in the NHL, particularly after the first 10 picks, would you take that?
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting. I guess you're saying you're getting an NHL player.
Yeah, I also like the fact that he's right-handed.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Not every right-handed center is a center. When they turn pro, sometimes they are shifted to the wing. But I like the fact that the Lightning just don't have a lot of right-handed forwards now in the NHL.
Right.
I was actually noticing a lot of right-handed forwards at this development camp, but how many of these guys are going to be on the Lightning, and how many years down the pike is that going to take for them to get there.
Steve said that Howard signed a 3-year entry-level
Oh,
contract.
so it was a 3-year deal.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought the college
So
players had to sign a 2-year deal. Obviously, I got that wrong.
Let me see here. I want to go to some more questions. But great scouting report, Matt. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Let's go to Boomer, who says, can you discuss if you think the window of win now has been extended by Julian? In my opinion, it most definitely has. Gensel is younger than Stammer with more production. Geeky and Gonsalves are young players with a chance to shine. Peltier and Holmberg add more needed bottom 6 depth. Don't sleep on OBJ. Gordo has JBB extended this window by 5 years in the last 2 off seasons.
So Julian feels the window is open. I mean, he's repeated how many times, I like our team, I like our team, I like our team. It is also beyond dispute that the Lightning have not necessarily through the draft, but through other means, gotten players to make their overall roster, their average age, a little younger than it would be had they not made those moves, essentially. I would say the 2 biggest areas of, I won't even use the word concern, but the Lightning are going to have to address at some point the fact that Ryan McDonough is 36 and Victor Hedman will be turning 35 in December. So I think they are still playing at an extremely high level. McDonough was arguably one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL last year. I'm not saying that this is happening this year or even the year after. He signed his extension that kicks in this upcoming year. So it's not like the Lightning have to worry about, them losing him for some reason. He's under contract. And McDonough, I think they would like to re-sign. What Julian also said is, I'm going to wait the season and then assess where our team is at, which is kind of what he said when the Stamkos contract came up, right? So, I mean, that's his prerogative as GM. McDonough, I think, wants to stay, though. But, at some point, would you say that Victor Hedman and Ryan McDonough are the 2 most impactful defensemen on the Tampa Bay Lightning? If the answer is yes, I think most Lightning fans would say yes. You are looking at 2 guys in their mid-30s. So when Boomer talks about, 5 years, beyond 5 years, I mean, at some point, I think that those areas are going to have to be addressed, but I don't think that it's imminent.
No, and we've seen defensemen play late 30s, their 40s. Those guys keep themselves in great shape. I know they've had a lot of wear and tear, understood. But I think today's NHL, look, if part of it is that you say these players train differently, they're all in great shape, one of the effects of that, or the benefits of that, is that you can play longer, assuming that you stay healthy. When I talk about keeping the window open, too, I think first and foremost, you need to have elite players at every level of your team. And they have to be still relatively in the prime of their careers. Obviously, the forward position, the Lightning have that. Defensively, I think you would still say that McDonough and Hedman are playing at a very high level. And then, of course, you can't keep that window open if you don't have good goaltending. And I think Andrei Vasilevsky showed this year again that he was one of the elite.
Vasi age-wise is in his prime. Now, we can't foresee, potential pitfalls with injuries. But, I mean, for goalies, if they can stay healthy, and by healthy, I'm really talking about kind of wear and tear injuries. They're up, they're down, up, down, up, down, up, down, managing the workload and all of that. I mean, goalies can play at a very high level well into their late 30s. I mean, we've seen it from Bobrovsky, certainly. Saw it from Brodeur. Saw it from Patrick Waugh. So I think that, to me, Vasi's in a completely different category. I don't think the Lightning really have to think about, the heir apparent. Maybe that's the way to look at it. And again, when I'm saying this, I think that both McDonough and Hedman have a lot of really, really good hockey ahead of them. But what Boomer talked about is extending the window for half a decade or longer. At some point, you're going to need a difference-making defenseman sooner than some of these other guys, because the other guys are younger. They just are. And I think that's a credit to Julian, bringing guys to the Lightning when they're in their early to mid or to late 20s. Bjorkstrand's 30. and giving them time with the Lightning with runway. Julian's done a masterful job of that.
Yeah. He has. And, finding, I don't want to say bargain deals, but players who may be looking for a bounce back season or making a strategic trade like you do with Jake Gensel, who's younger and really productive than Stammer. I think those are shrewd decisions and has allowed the Lightning to be a contender. Look, I think the narrative going into the first round of the playoffs this year was there were a lot of I don't know many people who picked Florida to win. There were a lot of people who were on the Lightning bandwagon. I'm not telling you, partner, that was the right play, but it certainly is eye-opening when you consider the fact that the Lightning have been on this pretty incredible run. You don't get to that place in people's minds if you're not a team to be reckoned with. Now, again, losing in the first round, this and that, a lot of that, the other team is going to have a say. But what I'm telling you is it wasn't like the Lightning had a situation at hand where their play was on the downhill. I mean, a lot of people felt really good about this team, even as far into this winning streak in terms of every year that they've been in over the last decade. Usually you see a drop-off. The Lightning were peaking at a pretty good time, and a lot of people were jumping on that bandwagon. So I think Julian's job is looking at it and saying, and that was confirmed at the end of the year when Julian basically said, I like our team.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's incumbent upon the players they have and management to say, okay, you like your team. All right, how does that translate to now playoff success again? And that's going to be their goal. It's their goal year in and year out. But I think he's strategically finding some players who fit what they want to do, making some shrewd business decisions. And then there is some luck involved because you have to hope your star players stay healthy and perform. And I think for the most part they have.
Yeah.
But it's a good question. And I know Boomer had several other questions in this email.
Well, we keep extending our season. I don't know if you want to try and add one more just for questions. I mean, I'm open for doing that.
We have a few that we can save.
Maybe
for
next week
time.
we do a question only show, unless there's
promote it a little bit, and we'll have you guys. What's your biggest question mark heading into training camp? Who you looking for? Steve says he's out of town next week. Let's do it in 2 weeks. Yeah, let's do it in 2 weeks. Yeah,
putting our schedule together on the fly.
We'll do that because I don't want to rush these questions either, and you guys take the time to write them, and I want to give the proper respect to them.
Things should, we don't know for certain, things should be fairly quiet now for several weeks.
Yep.
Let's put it that way.
It should.
And if we have to do a sharp left turn somewhere to address something, we can do that. But otherwise, we'll shoot for week after next to kind of let the dust settle even more and devote a show to your questions.
Partner, I always look forward to these shows.
Yeah, me too.
Even in the off season, it's a lot of fun connecting with you and our fans and Steve and everybody there. We'll do it again in a couple of weeks. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the week here. Partner, great job as always. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks, if not before. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you guys. I am Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.